So we're holding Pirkei Avot Perek Bet, Mishnah Het. Rabbi Johanan ben Zakkai, very important leader of Am Yisrael, a very important figure. He lived during the end of the Second Temple era. He saw the Churban, and he was very much responsible in a direct way for the survival of Torah in Eretz Yisrael. He had many students, and there's a whole story in the Gemara of how he was able to leave Yerushalayim, leave the city, Yerushalayim, and meet with Vespasius, the Roman emperor-to-be, and ask him a favor to spare a city, Yavne v'chachamea, Yavne and its chachamim. Yerushalayim was going to be destroyed. There was no way to stop it. He saw that. He had a difficult time communicating because there were always individuals, Jewish individuals, biryonim as they were called, who did not want to have any communication with the Romans, and they were going to put up a fight. And here was Rabbi Johanan, who foresaw what was going to happen, that there was no way to prevent the Churban. It was already decreed from above. So let's at least save whatever we can save. Let's at least ask the Romans to spare something. And of course he was granted that. The Roman was amazed how Rabbi Yochanan knew that he will be the next emperor, because right after he told him that, very soon afterwards he was notified that he's the next emperor. So he did him that favor, and that is of course what allowed the Jewish tradition and the teaching of the Torah to continue uninterrupted even after the Churban for many years in Eretz Yisrael, later on in Bavel. And of course that was a tremendous revival of Torah that needed strengthening during such a very difficult period. So Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai kibel mehilel meshamai. He's the next generation to receive the tradition. And of course, when a person is directly given over the tradition, the responsibility is very, very big on his shoulders to give it over, to continue to give it over to others, to teach it to others. Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai was known for being a very knowledgeable person in many, many areas other than just Torah. So he was a great teacher. And he had many students. Here in this Mishnah, or actually in the following portion of the Mishnah, it will tell us about 5 of his closest students, perhaps of the more knowledgeable students that he was very close to, that he actually spent time with them, learned with them, discussed many issues with them, and that is what we will see, that there's an emphasis on 5 students more than the rest of the students that he had. Each one had very unique qualities that stood out, and they were great in their own right, these students. But before we get to the students, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was obviously in charge of Torah in his time, tells us a very important point about Torah. And that is, Hu haya omer, im lamata Torah harbe, even if you learned, Baruch Hashem, and you accomplished a lot in Torah, al tachzik tova latzmecha, don't feel so proud of yourself. Don't take all the credit for yourself. First of all, ki lechach notzarta, he says. You were after all created for that purpose. We are here to learn, we are here to teach, we are here to continue carrying the torch of Judaism to the next generation, to give it over to them. So we have great responsibilities. It's not something that we should just, look at as, oh, it's an accomplishment. We were able to study this book, we were able to go through all the Gemarot, we were able to learn all the Mishnayot. Yeah, it's very nice. It is definitely an accomplishment. But one has to look at it much more seriously. Torah is not just meant to be an accomplishment, it's meant to be a guide for us to live by. And it's also intended for us to share with others who may not have that Torah. So that's why it's important on how we look at the Torah. It's very important that we have the right perspective of what the learning is all about. That's why he tells us, be careful. It's not just don't take the credit. I mean, it's not just a small piece of advice. He's actually telling us to be very careful not to have the wrong attitude at this important accomplishment. Nevertheless, it is important. He's not saying it's not. But be careful, lo lachzik tova latzmecha, because in the end, if you learned, guess what? You have a responsibility to teach it to others. Ki lechach notzarta. You were created for learning it, and why should you learn it? Not only for you to know it, but also to teach it to others. So that is the second interpretation, really, on al tachzik tova latzmecha. Is not only don't take credit for it, don't feel that it's such a great accomplishment by itself, unless you do something with it. Al tachzik tova latzmecha can also be interpreted, don't hold it back for yourself. Don't hold on to it yourself, but give it and share it with others. Imagine somebody who has a great recipe for a brownie. You know what chocolate brownies are? Mm-hmm. Good, tasty. You know, you think they would want to share it with others? A lot of people don't want to share their secret. But others would, if they're happy with it, if they're so excited about it, if they think, oh, this is something so great. Why not? Don't be selfish about it. Don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Share it with your friends, share it with your neighbors. It's a good recipe. Why not? Let them enjoy it too. So Torah is something that, of course, not everybody will have a tremendous part of it, because not everybody, unfortunately, sits down and learns Torah a whole day. There are chachamim, there are teachers, there are those who are entrusted with the Torah to give to others, to teach others. So those people have to remember that it's not something to just be proud about. It's after all, if we are able to, Baruch Hashem, succeed and learn and cover a lot of ground, it is because Kilechach Notzarta. Ultimately, that is the purpose. Hashem has given certain individuals the talents, the abilities to be able to write Sifrei Torah. They are very artistic. They should write. So it's not the business aspect of it. It's Kilechach Notzarta. You have the talent. You're created for that purpose. And every individual has something unique about him, that he's here for that purpose. Then use it for a good purpose. Don't just keep it for yourself. Don't be so proud of it. And what's wrong with being proud of it? Because you may not continue to do what is intended to be done with it. If you say, oh, Baruch Hashem, I accomplished, that's it. That's all I'm going to think about. No, that's not the idea here, is the accomplishment. That's good, but that's not the idea. The idea is to make use of it. And why to make use of it? Kilechach notzarta. You were created for that. It's not just a challenge. Go ahead and let's see how much you can cover, how much you can accomplish, how much you can learn, how much you can learn by heart. No. Lechach notzarta is a very important idea over here. The Jew is created, the Jew comes down into this world for this purpose. To take the Torah, learn it, of course, and give it over to the next generation. So don't just take credit for having done something right. That's very nice, it's nice. But that's not something that we should be focused on. After all, you're given this ability, Baruch Hashem, this accomplishment too, to use it for the ultimate ideal, and that is to give it over to others. You're going to say something?
What's the punishment, Rabbi, for somebody who acquires knowledge and doesn't share it with others?
It's definitely not very good. You know, I'm not going to specify a particular punishment. They're not going to be very happy with him. Had he been capable of doing something with that Torah, something constructive, and teaching it to others, and just kept it for himself. First of all, the Kabbalah talks about the fact that people sometimes don't complete their mission. They have to come back for having, not done something that they should have done. So that in itself is already, a problem, if you want to call it that you have to come back. On the other hand, of course, a person who only learns and does not teach, he loses out in many other ways. When a person teaches, he learns. As the rabbi tells me, Kol melamedai hiskalti, I was able to gain further knowledge and even more knowledge through my students, by teaching, through dialogue, right? By discussing the various halachot, by clarifying, by answering questions. So an individual who does not do that, he's very limited. So he loses out in more than one way.
But this is a great thing.
What?
This is a great thing.
What is great?
I mean,
Oh, a sin? Well, it all depends if there are others who are doing it. If he's the only one in town and he deprives everyone of his knowledge, and as a result of that, people do not know the halachot, then of course it's even more serious. But there may be others who are able to fill in the spot. Nevertheless, he will still be lacking.
you will see this.
Sure, because the whole idea is not just to keep it for yourself, as we said, it's to share. Torah is milashon hora'ah. The word Torah means to instruct. So it's not just to learn, it's to instruct it to others. Therefore, Rabbi Johanan wants us to aspire to continue to learn, and therefore not to just stop and look back and how much we accomplished. If a person just looks at what he has done, he may say, oh, it's a lot, Baruch Hashem, enough. No. That is a very important idea. You're created for this. That is what life is all about for a Jew. You don't just stop doing it and you look back and say, Baruch Hashem, look at all that I've done. I've gone through all these sefarim. Very nice. But remember, ki lechach notzarta, you can't stop. So don't even think about how much you've done. I haven't done enough. That's what you should think. Yeah. When an individual sees that Baruch Hashem, he has atzlacha, he's very successful in a particular area of learning, of midot, of interaction with the keilah, with the community, in some area that he is very successful, just in some area that he, in particular, is. He should realize that Hashem gave him, equipped him with the abilities, with the talents to be able to do so. Not everybody is built or made out to be a mohel or a shochet. To slaughter an animal, some people can't stand the sight of blood. They're never going to be shochatim. They may not even be doctors because of that. Mohel also not. There are some people who are very good at that. As we said with the sofer, there are those who are very good and handy or creative, artistic with their hands. Not everybody can be such a good sofer. You can learn how to write the aleph bet beautifully. If you're trained, you eventually will figure it out. It may not be the most accurate, it may not be the most beautiful writing, but you'll be able to do it. Why not? You can learn it, right? Yeah. There is, in the Farsi, aleph bet, in the ABC, and in the Arabic too, there are different kinds of calligraphy, of how to write. The same words, using the same letters, different styles. You remember what it's called?
No.
You don't remember what it's called? The fancier writing? It begins with a na. It begins with na. Huh? See? And you remember it, but I had to remind you the first letters. Nastaliq, yeah. Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about, right? Does everybody know how to do that? It takes a certain creative hand to be able to do that. And the same thing with the Chinese characters. There's some calligraphy involved, and if you want to do it nice and beautiful, you have to be trained for that. So same thing with safrut, lehavdil. I mean, safrut, which is of course with kavanot and ktarim, with crowns and the letters, there's a lot more going on with our letters. And there's halachot, tremendous halachot, in writing a Sefer Torah and tefillin and mezuzot. Nevertheless, if one does have it, that's a sign that Hashem wants him to use it. It's not just, oh, I can do it, but I'm not going to. No, perhaps that's what you need to do. But let's assume that he has already done it and he has succeeded. He should look at it as, Baruch Hashem. It came from Shamayim, that talent, and the talent came from Shamayim so that I can do that, because perhaps that's what I'm here for, amongst other things. So that's how one should look at any talent that he may have, any unique talent that has helped him in accomplishing something worthy, of course, that Hashemayim, they gave him this. He was born into the mazal, or within a family, that gave him these abilities. Yeah. There are others who are great musicians. There's a lot of talents, all kinds of talents. Not everybody has all of them. Someone has this, someone has that. Hashem wants there to be a balance. There should be a little bit of everything in this world. So the main idea here is to make good use of those talents that Hashem has given us, because kilechach notzarta, perhaps that is why you were created. That is why you were given what you were given, is to put it to good use. Chamisha talmidim hayu lo Rabbi Johanan ben Zakkai. He had 5 students that we just mentioned, special students. Ve'eluhen Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkenos, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, Rabbi Yossi HaKohen, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. He had many students, but these were 5 very, very special, learned individuals who stood out. They stood out in some very, very unique way. They had something that was very, very special about them that everybody knew. They must have been popular too. They were big chachamim. And what he's going to tell us about these 5 students are the qualities that these 5 students had, and each one had a very different quality than the other. So before I tell you the qualities, I just want to remind you, they were all righteous. They were all good. They were all chachamim. They all had good midot. They all were upright people. Nevertheless, each one stood out, right? As we said before about talents. So here too, each one stood out in a certain midah, characteristic. Now, why is it important for him to tell us in which midot they stood out? Because the idea behind these midot is that these are midot that they have accomplished on their own, not something that they were born with. Don't think that a person is just born like that. People can develop certain midot. Of course, people may have tendencies. Tendencies is something else. They have tendencies. They're born according to their mazal. They all have different kinds of tendencies, depending on the neshama too. Nonetheless, character development, not just character development, which means to work on one's midot, to refine one's character, that is already completely up to man's free will. You're not born with that. How much money you will make, that you're born with. The mazal. The mazal tells you, right? How smart a person is, that's also mazal. But just because he's smart doesn't mean that he will not learn a lot. It's still up to him how much he wants to learn. He could have a great brain, but it's empty, right? So these important midot are all midot that these students worked on their own, and therefore they achieved it. It's a big achievement for each one of them. Hu hayam moneh shivchan. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan discussed their praises, their midot, their achievement, and how special each one was in his own way. So let's go through each one. Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkenos. What was special about him? What was unique about him? He was a bor sud sheno me'abed tipa. He has such a great memory and retention that he was compared to a cistern that is very well cemented and lined inside, that doesn't drip, doesn't leak. Everything stays inside. And not only stays, it stays fresh. It's so well waterproofed, it's so well sealed, it's a bor sud, a cistern that is sud. You know what sud means? It's cemented. Insulated. So well that nothing is lost. Psh. So what does this mean? That everything that he learned was retained. It was not forgotten. But wait a minute, what's so special about that? He's born like that. The memory that a person has, the ability to remember things, is a gift from Shamayim. There are even stories about people memorizing the entire white pages, all the phone numbers. It's crazy. But they have that ability. So they're going to be on the Guinness Book World of Records. But that's not special. Why isn't that special? Because they were born like that. What's so unique about being a bor sud? A bor sud, again, somebody that is able to keep everything he got and not lose it, not forget it. What's so special about that? We're saying that these are achievements, remember. It's nice, but why is this an achievement? So the Chafetz Chaim explains this very nicely. He says there was once an old man who in his late 70s was able to describe what he remembers as a child. What happened when he was a child, the king came with an entire entourage, with the chariot and the soldiers, and they were dressed in a certain way, and he was a child, 5, 6 years old, and he could describe to you in the utmost detail everything that was on that chariot, the gold, the silver, and the flowers, and the designs, and what the soldiers were wearing, and what the king looked like. This is what he remembers way back then. But if you asked him what he did yesterday, he doesn't remember. Yesterday, he doesn't remember, but he remembers what happened 70 years ago. How could that be? So the Chafetz Chaim explains, it's not the memory per se. It's that sometimes when we are so excited about something, it's engraved in our mind. A child is impressionable. And the child seeing the king for the first time was very impressed. And because of the impression, it left a lasting impression on him forever. Whereas yesterday, whatever he did may not have been so important to him. And therefore, he doesn't remember what he ate for breakfast, what he did. It was not so important. So the Chafetz Chaim says that's the key over here with the first student, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkenos. It's not just retention. Even if you have good retention, you still have to like it. You still have to be excited about it to be able to remember. Otherwise, you only remember what you want to remember. And for it to be fresh, though you just learned, you have to have been excited. So he was the type who was always excited to learn, who was always immersed in his learning as though this would be the first time. It was also special to him that he would recall every detail as though this would have been just something he learned yesterday. That's what was so special about him, that he's a borsut, he doesn't lose a drop because he's always reviewing it. He's always into it. He's always so excited about it. When you're excited about something, you will remember it. So that is the shvach, how excited he was about learning Torah. All right, the next one, Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua, Ashrei Yolato. Anybody who saw him in the street said, Baruch Hashem, fortunate are his parents who gave birth to such an individual. Just him? Why wouldn't they say that about all the other rabbis? On him, they said, fortunate are the parents who gave birth to him. So in other words, what does that say? Not only is he a great person, that word, the words of fortunate are the parents, says two things. It talks about him and it talks about his parents. So what was so special about his parents? Obviously, when they see a good person, he was a good person. His behavior was excellent. When they see such a person, they say, lucky are such parents to have somebody like that. But there's something else. The rabbis tell us that Rabbi Yeshua's mother, when she was pregnant, she went to the Chachamim to pray, that they should pray for her, that the child should be a Talmid Chacham. So there was prayer on the mother's part. After the baby was born, she took him in the crib, in the carriage, in the Agala. She took him to the Bet Midrash so his ears should hear the voice of Torah from when he's a baby and an infant. So what do we see from that? The mother, the parents, actually invested a lot in this child. And Baruch Hashem, this is what came out. This is what it shows. So Ashrei Yolato was an individual who had very, very good character, very good midot, very nice person with everyone, got along with everyone. And therefore, he was special. But all that is also due to the credit of the parents, which the rabbis tell us, we see that it pays to begin education and imbuing our children with the best education and midot early on. There was a story about a woman who came to the doctor. She's about to deliver. She's in her 9th month. And she asked the doctor, when do I need to learn how to do all the things, that a mother needs to know how to do with her child? You go to Kaiser, they also tell you that it's a good idea for you to learn how to nurse and how to change diapers and how to do how to hold the baby, how to wash the baby, how to, take care of your child. So she asked the doctor, and she's almost about to deliver, when should I begin to learn? He says, you're 9 months late. You start as early as possible, But the point is, according to the Kabbalah, that preparation of the formation of the child really starts at the time of conception, which we spoke about before many times, about the Kedusha and the Tahara, that can make a big difference as to which neshama enters this child. And it does contribute a lot. Ultimately, the child has his own free will. Free will is something that will ultimately make the difference. But still, whatever we can do to help makes a difference. So Rabbi Yeshua was such an individual. Everybody had something good to say about him because of his midot. And the midot is a very important idea here because, as we saw before, that it meant if you don't have Torah with derech eretz, it's almost worthless. Torah has to be with derech eretz. Even though derech eretz, we said before, also means profession, derech eretz also means midot. It means both. Torah has to go along with derech eretz. It's not just enough for a person to be knowledgeable in Torah. Good character needs to accompany it. So Rabbi Yeshua was such an example of good character. Next one, Rabbi Yossi, Hasid. What's a Hasid? Anybody know what a Hasid is? It's not Breslov, Lubavitch, or Satmar. It's not that kind of a Hasid. There are Hasidim too. Hasid, when the rabbis use the term Hasid, they refer to somebody shoseh lifnim mishurat hadin. He's not just content latzet yedei chova. Somebody can fulfill the mitzvah of tzedakah by giving a couple dollars a year. You know that? I think it's about $5, $7, and he has fulfilled his obligation of tzedakah, of the mitzvah of tzedakah, for the entire year. But that's not maaser. It's far from maaser. It's not tzedakah beyad rechava, with an open hand. It's definitely not generous. It says patuach tiftach et yadecha. You have to open your hands. It also says to be careful, lo la'alim ayin, v'it'alamta. The Torah warns us not to look away when you can help someone who's in need of help. You have to be careful not to look away, even if it's giving him a little bit. So there's a lot of mitzvot related to tzedakah. But a person says, yeah, but it's enough what I did. After all, yatzati yedei chova. A person, there are two individuals who pray the same prayer. One rushes through it without kavanah, and one goes slower with kavanah. They both prayed, but one was latzet yedei chova, just to fulfill his obligation, get it over with, and the other one did it right. It's a big difference. There's no doubt that there's a big difference. So a Hasid always looks for ways not to just get by. I want to just get by, right? No, I want to do it better. Every mitzvah, to just do it better. And of course, a Hasid is an individual who's forgiving. Even if somebody owes him, he says, it's okay if you can't, I'll forgive you. A Hasid is an individual who's extra careful with mitzvot to make sure that they're done properly, right. You can buy two kinds of etrogim, one for $5 and one for $100. Which one should you buy? If we're talking about you can afford the $100, of course, buy the $100. It's more hidur mitzvah. Who does that? Hasid. You can fulfill the mitzvah with a $5 or two. You fulfill the mitzvah, you get credit for it. No, ani lo mistapek b'zeh. In other words, I'm not content with just getting by. That's it. Just get by. No. I want to do the best. That's called Hasid. So Rabbi Yossi was that kind of an individual. He stands out in that one area that he always wanted to do the better way to do it. That's very, very special. Next, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel Yerechet. Whenever anybody sees this, he thinks, wait a minute, only Rabbi Shimon was Yerechet? You know what Yerechet means? God-fearing. Well, it's not just God-fearing. He's afraid of sin. Believe me, every one of these rabbis was also Yerechet. But what's Yerechet? There are various levels we discussed in the past when it comes to Yir'ah. There's one who is just Yareh HaOnesh. He doesn't want to be punished. He doesn't drive fast in the freeway because he doesn't want to get a ticket. Right? Then there's one level higher. He doesn't drive fast in the freeway because he doesn't want to hurt anyone. He realizes that the faster you drive, the more dangerous it is. And then there's the third level, which is the highest level. He doesn't want to drive fast because he doesn't want to go against the law. Of course he doesn't want to hurt anybody. Of course he doesn't want to get a ticket. But he's in a higher level. He doesn't want to break the law. Right? So in the same way, lehavdil, when it comes to chataim, there are different levels of yirah. There's a person who doesn't want to do an averah because he's afraid of the onesh mishamayim. They're going to punish him, right? There's one who's yireh het. He's afraid of causing a sin. How can I do this against Hashem? How can I go against him? Much higher level. Yireh shamayim amiti. He loves Hashem so much that how could he do this against him? So Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel was a very, very, very big yireh het. He was so concerned about chataim that he was extra careful. Just like Rabbi Yossi was in Ma'asim, in mitzvot, he was extra careful not to come to an averah. So he would possibly even make gdarim, fences, which the Chachamim advise us sometimes, have fences that you don't chas v'shalom stumble. Because we're only human and we stumble. We stumble sometimes. Yeah, that happens to just about everyone. Even to Moshe Rabbeinu, even David HaMelech, everyone. The reason why those stories are brought down in the Torah, where the greatest of the greatest stumbles, is to teach us that it's human to stumble and to do teshuvah on that. Lehorot lanu teshuvah. The reason why they are recorded, in the Torah they are recorded for other reasons too. Nobody should think Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Torah on his own. If he did, why would he criticize himself? Does that make sense to you? Moshe criticizes. He writes in his own Torah, I made a mistake. I was wrong. I got angry. Nobody will know where I'm buried. Doesn't anybody want? Everybody wants to know where they're, so people can come to the grave. You will not enter the land. If Moshe made this book up on his own, why would he say that? So the rabbis tell us those incidents that are negative somewhat were recorded to remind us that first of all Moshe did not write it. Hashem wrote it. And second of all, lehorot lanu teshuvah, like it says by David HaMelech, to teach us teshuvah, to teach us the way that if these people made a mistake, they went and did whatever they can to correct it. They didn't just make a mistake and live with a mistake. They did whatever they can to correct it. So Rabbi Yossi was yireh het. He was very, very careful. Shelo yikashel, that he should not stumble. And rabbis tell us that one way not to stumble is to pray, is to ask Hashem in our prayers. Shelo nikashel lo ba'olam hazeh velo ba'olam haba. In other words, it should not affect us in this world or in the world to come. In other words, there you're not going to be nikashel, but we should not be nikashel here, that it should affect our olam hazeh and our olam haba. Shelo nevosh ba'olam hazeh, olam haba, we should not be embarrassed. So it's important to pray and to ask that we should not make a mistake where our words will be misunderstood. It has happened to me. People have come over to me. You say, I think you said this and this and this. And it bothered me, he told me, just the other day. And I haven't seen this individual for several years. So it was very nice that he came by, and I said, well, you misunderstood what I said. This is what I meant. I also said, thank you for clarifying it to me. I never really understood it very clearly. So I felt bad initially that I actually caused somebody to misunderstand. But that's the fault of the one who does not fully explain himself. The problem is, how much can we explain ourselves? There will always be somebody who may misunderstand. But the Chachamim warned us about it. In Pirkei Avot, we learned it already. Hizaharu b'divrechem, shema tachovu chovat galut. Right? You be careful with what you say, because you may end up speaking or teaching people who are considered ma'im hara'im. In other words, people who are not in the best circumstances and are not observant and may not understand well what you're saying. So anyway, you can never be cautious enough. We have to do our best, but because mistakes happen, it's important to ask Hashem that He should spare us from such mistakes. As David HaMelech says, Shegiot mi yavin. Why we make mistakes, how should we know? Why mistakes happen. And when somebody would write a book, he would have to be extra. The Chafetz Chaim was so careful to review what he wrote, because he says people are paying top dollars, he said, even though it wasn't top dollars, it was, but he says people are paying to get something perfect. And if Chas v'Shalom it's not perfect, that means I'm cheating them. That's how he was careful with Gezel. When some letters were missing, he asked the person to return the sefer to him. or if the kricha, the binding, went over and covered, he was very upset. So he had to check every single book himself sometimes. He didn't trust anybody else if everything was written right. Yeah, we have to do our best. So tefillah is a very important idea as well in being a rechet. The next one is Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, Ma'yan HaMitgaber. Rabbi Elazar was such a great person, a learned person, that he was compared to a ma'ayan, a spring that always is flowing, mitgaber, always flowing. What is this describing? This is describing an individual who's very creative in his learning. He's not just very learned, knows a lot, but he's ma'ayan mitgaber, mechadish chidushim. He's able to resolve problems. He's able to think up of new ideas and concepts. He's able to interpret things. This is not the same midah of Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, who remembers everything by heart. He doesn't remember necessarily everything by heart, but he has the ability to grasp and to analyze, and he's very sharp, like a ma'ayan mitgaber, like an overflowing, always flowing a spring. All right, so that's the description of him. Now, after he gave us a description of all of them, he tells us, if all the rabbis in Israel would be on a scale, on one part of the scale, and Eliezer ben Hurkenos, who had a great retention, would be on the other plate of the scale, he would tip the scale. Abba Shaul says, I have a different version that I heard. All the Chachamim of Israel will be on the scale. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkenos, and even Rabbi Eliezer was with them, and Rabbi Elazar b'chaf shniya, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, who was the one like the Ma'ayan HaMitgaber, he would be on the other side, Machriyat Kulam. He would tip the scale. Wait a minute, that's two opposite versions, two very different versions. Who really will tip the scale? Now, first of all, why is it important for him, Rabbi Yochanan, to tell us who will tip the scale? What did we say before? Rabbi Yochanan is concerned about perpetuating Torah. Right? That's his main goal here. And he says, you want to know on who the Torah will rely on the most? Perpetuating Torah. If we only have one person of all these Chachamim, one quality, one talent, which would be the most important talent that's necessary for perpetuating the Torah? So the first version says, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkenos' talent of remembering everything. Remember, these are days where you didn't have printing press. You didn't have Chumashim and Gemarot. You need somebody to remember halachot. Where is this halakha written? What's the halakha? We have to go to him. He knows everything. But Abba Shaul says no. He recalls the version is Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, the one that's Kemayana Mitgaber. We need his creativity. Which one is it? So actually, if you look at the Gemara, there's a Gemara that says that there was a discussion amongst the Chachamim, a debate. Which one is preferable? They're both, the following two are good, but which one is preferable if you only have one? Sinai or Oker Harim? A Sinai is a nickname of an individual who knows all the Torah by heart. An encyclopedic mind, a photographic memory. It's called like Sinai, Torah mi Sinai. It's called Sinai. Then there's another individual who's does not know everything Baal Peh, but he's Oker Harim. He uproots mountains. That's a description of somebody who's very analytical. He can uproot mountains. In other words, he can bring proof on resolving all kinds of complex issues, all kinds of questions that nobody knows how to figure out. He's able, by uprooting mountains, uprooting meaning by being able to solve it in very, very creative ways. That is strength that not everyone has. That's a sharp analytical mind that can do that. So which one is more important if we can only have one? So the Gemara's conclusion is they're both important, but if we only have one, we want that Sinai. Why? Because in the end we need to know where the halakha is. Where the halakha is and what the halakha is, and that Oker Harim may not be able to do that for us. So in the end we need somebody who knows the halachot. Okay, if that's the case, you can understand why this Mishnah relates or corresponds to that Gemara too, because they're very similar. The two talents are needed, and one says we can't do without this one, the other one says we can't do with the other one. The reality is we need both of them. All right. So this was so far a description of who the Talmidim were. And now we're going to see what each one of the Talmidim has to say. What they have to say about what is important in life. What should we pursue in life? Amar lahem, Mishnah Tetzur u ezu derech yishara sheitbak ba ha'adam. What is a good path, a good trait that man should pursue and should acquire? What kind of a question is that? A person has to work on all his midot. A person has to work on being honest, on not being lazy, on being fair. And there's a lot of midot that we have to work on. So what is he telling us? Ezu derech yeshara, which is the right path, which midah, in other words, should a person acquire? The most important of all the midot. If you can only focus on one, which one should it be? But why focus on one? Because a person cannot really focus on everything. A lot of people end up being mediocre, so average in many midot. Not bad, not great, mediocre. If that's the case, then which midah should it be that I should do my best to excel? If everything else is going to be mediocre, then at least one. Why is that so important? Because the rabbis tell us that a person should always strive lishlemut. Shlemut means to be complete, to have integrity, to be sincere, to be upright. Echad balev, echad bapeh. In other words, that's called shlemut, completeness in his midot. Even though he may not be the best or the most generous, but he may be shalem. Shalem means that he's okay, he's complete. So which midah, Rabbi Yochanan is asking them, should be the midah that requires the most work? And if we're able to work on this midah, it will also help us with all the other midot. So attack one midah, and perhaps if we excel in that midah, or perfect the midah, it will help us achieve shlemut. Shlemut in the sense of being good in all the midot. Which one is it? So pay attention, because each one of these students that we just read about their character, their own personal character and their talent, their advice seems to be related to their character. What they're going to advise us seems to be related to who they were. But it's more than just being related. They actually are telling us or revealing to us how they became who they became. That's the way I understood it. They're telling us how they became what they are, which midah did they work on, which is interesting. Rabbi Eliezer omer ayin tova. What's an ayin tova? It's a good eye. What's a good eye? A good eye is not just a person who's generous. It's a person who's positive. He looks at things in a positive way. He always looks at the good and bright side of everything. That's an ayin tova. Accepting. And what does this have to do with Rabbi Eliezer? What is Rabbi Eliezer telling us that an ayin tova is important? He was an individual who remembered everything. He retained everything. In order for a person to retain, he has to be accepting, even though he may not like something, even though he may be critical of someone or something. You want to retain it. You want to have an ayin tova in seeing the value of things. So Rabbi Eliezer was able to see the value. He was able to appreciate through his ayin tova. He worked on having an ayin tova, which basically meant that he's able to appreciate and see the good in everything. And being able to see the good in everything allowed him to retain everything, to preserve everything. An ayin tova is an individual who's content with what he has. He's not jealous. He's mefargen le'acherim, as we say in Hebrew. He doesn't begrudge other people, right, for what they have. He has a positive outlook on everything. That is what helped him remember too. By having such an attitude, by being happy and content, happiness and being content actually helps an individual preserve what he has learned. Because it's a chain reaction. You're happy, you're not worried, you're not upset, you're able to focus, you're able to know things with more clarity. So ayin tova is looking at things in the right way, being happy with what you have, therefore retaining, which is similar, right, everything that you have learned. Next, Rabbi Yeshua says Chaver Tov. Rabbi Yeshua Chaver Tov. He says, you know what you should work on is being a good friend and getting yourself a good friend. When he says Chaver Tov, he means both. Being a good friend and having a good friend. Why? Because Chaverim, friends just happens to be, are an important contributing factor in influencing one's character. Friends have a tremendous influence over one. So he says if you have good friends, you try to be a good friend, it's going to be very mashpia, it's going to very much influence your midot. Chaver Tov, as we've said in the past, is much more important than a rabbi, because a rabbi will criticize you 1,000 times and it won't enter. It won't be as effective as a friend who cares about you, who rebukes you. You may more readily pay attention to what a good friend says because you trust him. So having a good friend, he says, could make a world of a difference in the formation of one's personality, one's character, one's midot tovot. Rabbi Yossi, remember Rabbi Yossi, he was the one that was called a Hasid. Right? Hasid. He says, he advises us, Shachen Tov, have good neighbors. What's the difference between a good neighbor and a good friend? You're much more often with your neighbors than you are with your friends. Neighbors means your surroundings. You want to be careful that you have good surroundings, that you live amongst good people, for two reasons. First of all, if they're bad, you won't be able to be a Hasid. They won't let you. You won't progress. And the reason why Shchenim is so significant to being a Hasid, because the greatest challenges occur close to home. If you want to be a Hasid and they're going to test you in Shemayim, where are they going to test you first? Where the greatest challenges lie, with neighbors, problems, complaints. So as they say, charity begins at home, right? Same thing. Hasidut begins with neighbors. In other words, it's one thing to be a Hasid in the Bet HaKnesset. You're nice, you pray long, you're nice to people who you're only going to see for a minute. Let's see you being a Hasid with your neighbor who gives you a hard time. So in other words, Shachen Tov, be a good neighbor, and of course get yourself good neighbors, because ultimately you don't want to be, your lifestyle, you don't want it to be ruined because of bad neighbors, bad influences. So he says the neighborhood, the neighbors are crucial to being what he was able to be, a Hasid. Next, Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon omer haro'et hanolad. This is very interesting. Rabbi Shimon is the one that was a Yerei Het. No, one second. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel was Yerei Het. So he was God-fearing, very God-fearing. So he says haro'et hanolad. What does haro'et hanolad mean? The one who always looks at what the consequences of his actions will be. Now, we don't always do that. We don't always evaluate before we do something what are the pros and cons of what we're about to do. We should do that. That's the best thing to do. But we don't. We sometimes act very quickly, rashly, and we don't think twice about what we're about to do, and that's why we make mistakes. So Rabbi Shimon says, part of being a Yerei Het involves Ro'et HaNolad. You have to think about what the consequences are going to possibly be. Right? If you do not, you cannot be Yerei Het. Always evaluate the situation before you do anything. Rabbi Elazar is the next one. He's the one that is Mayana Mitgaber. He tells us Lev Tov. There was, all the midot are important, but he says, listen, you have to work on having a good heart. If you don't have a good heart, everything else is worthless. And Rabbi Johanan agreed with him. Amar lahem ro'eh ani divrei Elazar ben Arach shebichlal devarav divrechem. I agree, or I prefer Rabbi Elazar ben Arach's advice, because included in his advice are all of yours advice. If you don't have a good heart, you're not going to be able to be a Hasid. You're not going to have Ro'ed Nalad, Ain Tova, Chaver Tov, Shachen Tov. All of these things that were mentioned before that are very good and noble are not really possible if a person doesn't have a good heart. The heart is the most important one. Why is the heart the most important one? Because it's the most important organ too. All the kudot, all the commands to the whole body basically stems from the heart. That is why we say in the Kriyat Shema, "Velo taturu achrei levavchem v'achrei einechem." Don't go after what your heart desires, what your eyes see. Be careful. The heart is central. That's where the blood goes through. That is central. All the instructions, everything through the heart. And guess what? The Torah begins with a bet, Bereshit, and ends with a Lamed, Israel, the letters of a heart. Live. See? Everything depends on the heart. So he's right. Once a person has perfected his heart, if the heart is clean, the thoughts are clean. If the thoughts are clean, then all the other good midot are possible. If a person's heart and thoughts are not clean, how is he going to want to be good in other areas? It's fake. That is why the centrality of all the good midot are dependent on the heart. How does this fit in with his character? That he's kemayana mitgaber, because he was so excited. He had a good heart, so he had excitement, he had enthusiasm, and that is what made him kemayana mitgaber. And it's all from the heart. If the heart is clean and pure, it is able to be happy. It is able to be excited. As we will see soon, what the opposite of a good heart is it's terrible. But that's a good heart is very, very important. So work on the heart, Rabbi Yochanan says, what he's suggesting, and by doing so, we will be able to perfect the other midot as well. Now, let's just finish up the Mishnah with the opposite of the good qualities. Now, Rabbi Yochanan says, what is a bad way? What is a bad midah? What should we stay away? Keep a distance from. So Rabbi Eliezer says the opposite of what he said before, ayn ra'ah. He said ayn tovah, he said stay away from a bad eye. What's a bad eye? Ayn ra'ah. People don't understand that a bad eye is worse than jealousy. A person who is jealous means he wants to have what he has. You know what an ayn ra'ah is? I don't need what he has. I don't want him to have what he has.
Yes.
You know people like that, Abraham?
Yes.
Really? Oh, you
Yes. The people just said, in one of my eyes I would be blind, that I will see him blind.
Yes? Yeah, unfortunately, that's terrible. That's ayn ra'ah. So ayn ra'ah is the word, is according to Rabbi Eliezer, it's a terrible midah. In Hebrew we call him lo mefargen. This midah distances a person not only from other individuals, but also from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Such a person who has an ayn ra'ah has no simcha, has no sincerity. And the lack of simcha and sincerity will hurt you in many, many ways. So so Rabbi Eliezer feels that this is a terrible midah. If a person has that, in other words, Chas v'shalom, he has to take care of that, because otherwise it's going to get him into a lot of trouble. It's going to hurt him. Rabbi Yeshua says, the opposite of what I said before, a bad friend. Why a bad friend? Very simple. There's a lot of people who are good to begin with, and guess what has happened to them because of bad friendships? Hidarderu. They deteriorated. In other words, they became bad. Put a good apple next to spoiled, rotten apples, and it will rot. So he says, oy vavoy, if you have a chaver ra. Oy vavoy, he says, because you could be already a good person and you could lose all that goodness. So make sure you don't have chaver ra. Rabbi Yossi says shachen ra, for the reasons that we said before. Being around bad neighbors, bad people, even though they're not your friends, they're going to not let you live the way you'd like to live. They're going to put all kinds of ugly things around your house. They're going to put obscenities and pornographic pictures. And we live like that. And we're living in this place too, and surrounded by this. Yeah, you have to wear sunglasses, perhaps, when you go outside these days. Because that's shchenut with all kinds of ra. Whether it's the ra of West Hollywood, or whether it's the other ra of Hollywood. Right? It's all kinds of ra, yeah. And the Rambam, if you read the Rambam will tell you, go better live in a cave than live in such a place. He says, live in a cave, if you can't find some other city to live. Then why are we here? Huh? We're here to drive away the darkness with our light, hopefully. So, whatever we can do. Obviously, according to the Kabbalah, we're making tikkunim wherever we are. And there's Torah. As long as there's a place of Torah, then you can you can save yourself and protect yourself with the Torah. If you wouldn't have Torah, there would be no reason, not only no reason, it would be asur to even stay here. But because there's Torah, then at least, if you're able to manage, in such a place by learning and by attending shul and by being around good people, then you may be able to avoid being exposed to these elements. But that's the danger of shachen ra, according to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Shimon Omer something very interesting. Rabbi Shimon is the one that told us haroeh tanolad. Whoever sees the future, whoever sees the consequences of his actions, if he wants to be, a yireh chet, God-fearing person, he better evaluate before he does something. Here, when telling us what to avoid, he's the only one that does not tell us the opposite. We were expecting him to say, she'eno ro'eh tanolad. Right? He doesn't see the consequences. No, he doesn't say that. You know what he chooses? Be very, very careful not to have the following characteristic. Haloveh ve'eno meshalem. One who borrows money from people and never pays them back. Wow. What does that have to do with anything? Because this really shows a person who does not think about the future. If you don't pay back, they're never going to lend you. That's a simple meaning. But it's a lot deeper than that. Haloveh ve'eno meshalem is a person who's irresponsible. It's the exact opposite of a person who evaluates his actions before he does them, weighs the pros and cons. He's careful because he's responsible. That's why he's doing that. Loveh ve'eno meshalem is just the opposite. A person who borrows money, by the way, you cannot borrow money when you know you can't pay it back. If you know for sure you can't pay it back, you're not allowed to borrow. Unless you tell him, I don't have. And he says, okay, don't worry about it. But if he thinks you're going to pay him back, and you know you can't, you're not allowed to borrow. So haloveh ve'eno meshalem, it shows the opposite quality of the haroeh tanolad. He's a very irresponsible and inconsiderate and ungrateful. Ungrateful because the guy gave him. Oh, look at all the terrible midot that come from an individual who just has one bad habit. That's the bad habit that he chose to tell us, stay away from this. Loveh ve'eno meshalem. Because that in itself demonstrates or shows or indicates that this person is a very, very irresponsible person. Not only dishonest, irresponsible, which is terrible. How will he ever be yireh chet? So if a person ever gets close to this kind of a midah, he's in trouble. So therefore he tells us, Loveh ve'eno meshalem, be careful with that. Why? Echad haloveh min ha'adam keloveh min ha'makom baruch hu shene'emar loveh rasha ve'lo yishalem v'tzadik chonen v'noten. So he's telling us because when a person borrows from another individual, he's like borrowing from Hashem. It's the same thing. What does that have to do with anything? What he's trying to say perhaps is that anyone who's careless and is irresponsible in borrowing from other people, he will also be irresponsible and careless with the mitzvot with Hashem. He's irresponsible and not careful and not sincere with human beings, then you can expect him not to be like as responsible with Hashem. So it's like borrowing from Hashem. Hashem gave you the money. Hashem gave you life. Be grateful. Right? See how it's the same thing. You're ungrateful here, you're going to be ungrateful here. And that is why it's a terrible midah. The last one is Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar tells us levra. Remember, he told us a good heart was the most important one. Here he says a levra. Why a levra? A person who has a very bad heart. We're not talking about cholesterol right now, right? We're talking about a levra. A levra, you know what a levra includes? It really it's a composition. It consists of a person who is always thinking bad, negatively of others, how to hurt them, how to cheat. In Hebrew it's called choresh machshavot ra'ot. He's always thinking of or plotting. He's a levra. He's an evil person. A person who has those kinds of, and there are people like that, who are thinking of ways on how to cheat, thinking of ways on how to beat someone, thinking of ways of getting ahead of someone, Choresh ra. This individual will be full of worries. He will be a person who will always complain if things are not going his way. He will be an angry person. He will be a sad person. Because lev ra leads to all of these things. He's unhappy, basically. It's an unhappy, but it's not just unhappy. He's negative. He's evil. He's always thinking, designing of evil plots against people. And there are people in various degrees who have this. So Rabbi Elyahu says, stay away, chas v'shalom. If a person ever comes close to this, bidah, he's in big trouble. Because with this problem, this will lead to many, many other problems. So therefore, Ro'eh ani, amar lahem, Ro'eh ani divrei Elazar ben Arush, shebichlal dvarav divrechem. I agree with him once again, that a levra is the ultimate one to stay away from, because in his midah, in his advice, are included all the other things that all of you have said. This is where this Mishnah ends. Later on we will see what each one advises us additional ideas. This, however, this Mishnah was significant because of pointing out, I believe, a very, very important nekudah that Johanan wanted to bring out, and that is, look at these individuals, these special students of mine, look at the heights that they've reached. Look at how far they have gone in working on themselves and refining their character, and each one did it in his own unique way. That is why they're giving us their advice. And they're all correct. So in other words, that's why they're all mentioned, because they're all correct. Each one of those ideas that are expressed by each one of the students are important, they're correct, and they're definitely not to be ignored. However, the bottom line is the heart. The heart is something that requires tremendous amount of work, because people are not just born with a good heart. Remember, it's just not automatic. People have to work on it. Some people have a lot more work than others, but it's something that ultimately everybody has to work on to make sure that the heart is pure. If the heart is not pure, a person can never be sincere. He says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Do you really believe that, what you just said? You see what I mean? It has so many consequences. Not having that was not even mentioned over here. That is why he's just telling us one piece of advice, but he's not even telling us the whys of everything. Because there's so many details that follow, and the heart, being the central organ of the body, is also responsible for the midot. And if we want to work on our midot, it is better that we focus and excel at least in one midah. And the rabbis tell us the same is true with mitzvot. A person should, of course, do all the mitzvot as much as possible. But he should focus, if possible, on one mitzvah that he should be very strong, that he never gives up no matter what the cost. Because then that mitzvah becomes very charged. Choose. You can choose any mitzvah you want, but never give it up at no cost whatsoever. That mitzvah can become supercharged. When a person commits himself to one mitzvah, that commitment gives him the energy, the power to commit himself to other mitzvah too. So we have to start somewhere. That is the whole idea over here. Of this, or working on midot, take one. Working on mitzvot, choose one. And you know what? Not only will you excel in that one, B'ezrat Hashem, it will give you the impetus, the energy, and the motivation to continue to excel in other midot as well. Thank you.